Hi, my name is Jessica Gibson, and my question is, how does carbohydrate overload affect equine acute laminitis? Laminitis is something that horse owners hope that they never have to encounter. It's when the laminate tissue, which is what connects the pedal bone to the hoof wall, becomes inflamed, or in some cases completely separates from the hoof wall. It can become so bad it can cause the pedal bone to rotate or to sink, and sometimes it's so severe that the horse cannot even hold up its own weight. Here's a diagram to show what's going on. The picture to the right is what it should look like when it's normal, and then the left is when a horse has laminitis. So the picture to the right, here's the hoof wall, here's the laminate that's connecting the pedal bone to the hoof wall. And then to the picture to the left, here the laminate has separated, and now here's a space in between the laminate and the hoof wall. And you can see that the pedal bone has now rotated and is now pressing against the bottom of the hoof. The design of horses. So horses were made to be continual grazers. They were made to be in pastures, moving, eating throughout the whole entire day. There was a study done that showed 70% of the time horses spend grazing. Throughout the years though, people have changed this and have now made them into meal eaters. They feed them so many times a day, once a day, maybe twice a day, or even sometimes 3 times a day. This is especially true for performance horses because people want their horses to be performing at the highest levels, and so sometimes that requires to feed them extra energy. And one way that we can get the energy is to feed them grain, and starch is what comes from grain and is a form of energy. Here is a picture of the digestive tract of a horse system. So the foregut is made up of the stomach and the small intestine. And then the hindgut is the cecum, the large colon, and the small colon. And so you can tell that the stomach is relatively small, and it's where pre-digestion occurs. And then the small intestine is where mainly the most prominent digestion and absorption occurs. And is where it digests the starches, the sugars. However, whenever there's too much and it becomes excess, then it will go into the hindgut and it will become rapidly fermented, and this can cause some major issues. The carbohydrate overload model. This is used to kind of show the effects of what's going on during carbohydrate overload. Horses are induced with either cornstarch or oligofructose. They take blood samples and cecal ingesta samples, and then they euthanize the horse, so they disarticulate the hoof, and then they collect the liver, spleen, and lymph nodes in sterile containers. The effects of carbohydrate overload. By the time lameness has set in, there is an increase in gram-negative bacteria. They also found significant increases in Enterobacteriaceae and Salmonella. Within 26 to 29 hours, there were some major increases in gram-positive bacteria populations in Streptococci and Lactobacilli and found in the cecal fluid. These rapid and major changes are what lead to the development of laminitis. They also found that the horses that were induced with carbohydrate had enlarged cecal/colon lymph nodes. There are some things that are not really known about laminitis, and they still need more research. One of these is the products of fermentation that trigger laminitis. There was another study that was done where they induced horses with carbohydrates to see if vasoactive amines might be a possible candidate. Which vasoactive amines are, they affect the blood vessels and will cause vasodilation. After being induced, they found that the lactobacilli and streptococci significantly increased, which dropped the cecal pH as found in the previous study. Many forms of bacteria were tested for the capability to decarboxylase amino acids, which is what produces the vasoactive amines. They found 26 forms were capable of producing this enzyme. And then the species that belonged to the lactobacilli actually was originally found in the pig intestine and is a relatively new species. We get carbohydrates not only from grain, but we also get them from plants. And so one way that we can maybe try and prevent horses from eating too much or becoming affected by laminitis is to kind of know what's going on in the plants. And so plants try to fix carbon dioxide during photosynthesis in the presence of light, and when they do this, sugar is produced. But when excess sugar that is not needed by the plant, it will then form carbohydrates, which then makes fructose that is stored for later use by the plant. And then the rapid fermentation of these sugars and fructans cause for high glycemic and insulinic responses. When the excess of these spill over into the hindgut, saturated bacteria and lactic acid are produced, and this leads to a decrease in blood flow to the foot, and which means a decrease in nutrients also. Oligofructose effects on laminitis. Fermentation of oligofructose in the hindgut resulted in volatile fatty acid production and absorption blockage. It also led to a decrease in cellulitic and hemicellulitic bacterial cell numbers, fiber digestion, and bacterial diversity. It caused an increase in lactate and a decrease in cecal pH and cecal volatile fatty acid concentrations, which is a main source of what horses get their energy from. During laminitis, they found an increasing number of E. coli, and as in other studies, they found that streptococci was a major cause of laminitis. Here's just a diagram to show the digestion that occurs in a healthy horse and then in a horse that is going to be affected by laminitis. So in a healthy horse, the sugars and the starches need to be broken down in the stomach and the small intestine, and then they can be turned into glucose for energy for the horse. And then the same for fructans. It goes through fermentation so that the horse can use volatile fatty acids as an energy source. However, in a horse that has been fed too much, it has excess starch and sugars that cannot be broken down, and so the excess spills into the large gut, the large intestine, and it becomes rapidly fermented, which leads to laminitis. And the same for fructan. It becomes rapidly fermented because there's too much, and it leads to laminitis. Some things that we can do to prevent laminitis is trying to feed at the same time every single day. Horses are already not meant to be meal eaters. They're meant to be continual grazers, and so just by that alone, we're already messing with their digestive system. And so trying to feed at the same time can definitely help avoid issues. And then calculating the exact amount of feed. There are things out there that help us do this. There's tables that are based on the horse's activity level, their age, and their weight. And in these, it'll tell you what the nutrient requirements of horses are, and then by that you can determine what the nutrients from your horse, the hay that they're getting. And so with these two together, you can then determine how much extra grain you're going to need to feed to get your horse that they're not getting from the hay. And then just being educated on the feed that horse owners are giving their horses. Just knowing what's in it, what it's made out of. This can kind of help us determine maybe we're feeding too much, and if we are, maybe it's because the grain that we're feeding isn't giving the horse the enough nutrients that it needs, and so we're having to feed too much to try and get it to the level that it needs. So maybe there's a different feed out there that we can give them, that we can feed less amounts of. And then here's a diagram that shows different feed stuffs and then the percent starch and sugar in those feeds. So corn has the highest starch, and then barley has the next highest, and then oats. And then for sugar, the highest is found in molasses. And then our grasses have the next highest. And so some ways that help with these is to process them and process these feeds to make it more easily digested by the horse. So pasture management is another way that we can prevent laminitis. So warm season pastures, they contain less non-structural carbohydrates, which are your sugars, your starches, your fructose, than cool season. Warm season is Bermuda grass, switchgrass, blue stem, and then maintaining the soil moisture and fertility along with maintaining the grass by mowing and dragging can also help. Keeping this grass short helps the grass actually use the carbohydrates instead of storing it. Grazing horses in the morning rather than during the day when carbohydrate levels are the highest is another way, allowing them to graze in shaded pastures because the light brings out more of the carbohydrates. And then in spring and autumn are times of the year when levels of non-structural carbohydrates are the highest. And so these are times when you really need to watch horses and make sure that they're not showing any signs of laminitis, especially those horses that you know already have issues with digestive things. So, and then we can avoid putting horses on recently harvested fields because these fields have higher levels of the non-structural carbohydrates. And then we can use things such as grazing muzzles, which decrease the bite size and force horses to eat the tops of grass instead of the bottoms because the tops contain less of the non-structural carbohydrates. Here's a picture of a grazing muzzle, and so the horse can't really open up as wide, and it can't, get its head all the way to the bottom because it stops it here, and so it just kind of helps the horse be able to, like I said, not have such a big bite size and forces it to eat the tops of the grass. So some symptoms of laminitis are abnormal gait, high digital pulse, warm feet, constantly shifting back and forth on their weight. They might have a fever or even have diarrhea. And then here's a chart that shows the time to develop the symptoms in hours, and then the different starches, different carbohydrates. So we have cornstarch and oligofructin. And so the bars are the average time. And so as you can see, for basically every symptom, there's not a whole lot of difference in the cornstarch and the oligofructose. They, the time it takes is pretty much, the average time is pretty much the same, and there's not a whole lot of variation. This is a picture of a horse that has laminitis. He's going to be kind of leaning back and not putting a whole lot of pressure on his front feet. So we're going to need to know ways to treat a horse if they do have laminitis. Unfortunately, and it's not totally going to take it away, and it's definitely going to probably cause a horse to not be able to really be used anymore. In some cases, the horse might have to be put down. So some things that we can do, most of the treatments are used to increase the blood flow to the hoof. One way is through vasodilation, which relaxes the muscle wall of the vessels, causing the blood vessels to widen. Anticoagulants such as heparin and aspirin are also used, which help prevent blood clot. And then they have cryotherapy, which is a boot that goes over the hoof, and it has 3 differently shaped soles that allow for increased blood flow. They have different angles. One's at 10 degrees angle, they have one at 20 degrees, just kind of based off of the severity of the laminitis that the horse has. And then also these boots, they have a device that pumps fluid into around the hoof to allow for cooling to try and reduce the inflammation in that hoof. And then here's a picture of what the boot looks like. And so down here they can remove different pads and put, like I said, different soles to put the horse at different angles. And then they have fluid that circulates down in here to try and cool the inflammation, to try and reduce it. And that is it. Thank you.